And tragically, that was done at the behest of the people he ends up supporting. Why I don't agree with Thomas Oden is, having said all this, back to Africa, guys, he then says, yes, okay, but only the Orthodox ones. He discounts all the wonderful Gnostic ones. Oh, they were heretics. Because what he's trying to do is establish the deep roots of Orthodoxy. Now, I find this a suspect intellectual project. That's why I'm sad I can't talk to him about this, because he ends up supporting the crowd that smashed the Library of Alexandria in the name of Orthodox Christianity, which ends up supporting the ideas of John Smith. I will beat you into following the Orthodox customs. You've been reading Gnostic books. I saw them under your bed. You know, that's the way the Church Orthodox has dealt with all this, all these years. And I'm saying, if you've listened to my philosophy club, you'll know I'm saying, no, we have to get the truth out, guys. And the truth is not scary and frightening. The truth is the divine wisdom. These Gnostic texts are amazing if you study them and learn about them philosophically. A great Anglican professor of divinity has done a whole commentary on Mary Magdalene's Gospel, which was found in Egypt. I've done a commentary on it, and one on Thomas's Gospel. So, but at the moment, this is only reaching intellectuals in the Christian church. But obviously it didn't reach Thomas Oden, sadly. He's more of that Bible-bashing, back to the fundamentals type school, which I think is the core problem behind this so-called evangelical Christianity. Now, what I'm saying is much more ambitious. I'm saying we need to rethink what orthodoxy is. Orthodoxy is a term in Aristotle meaning straight to the truth, pinched by the Christians. What Aristotle meant by it was you use your intellect, your nous, to go straight to the truth using logic. You work out, is this a cup, or is it a car, or is it an elephant? What are they calling? It's a cup. I've gone straight to the truth. Actually, it's a glass. And so he provided this wonderful system called logic to go straight to the truth. Now, the trouble is, they don't know what the word means. People like Oden and these evangelists that misuse the term orthodoxy. And Putin, bless him, has based his entire invasion from Russia to Ukraine because he's orthodox. How is it going straight to the truth, to mass bomb cities, towns, civilians, terrorize them in winter, smash all their electric stations? This is the anti-Christ at work. This is fake, devilish stuff, which is the opposite of what Christ stood for. And it's been going a long time in the Orthodox community. I mean, Ivan the Terrible did the same stuff. He was also an amateur theologian like Putin, who thought that torturing people in his dungeons under the Kremlin to the point of death, so that they can then repent and come back to orthodoxy, and then you kill them, means their soul will go to heaven because they've repented at the last minute. You torture them with so much pain that they say, oh, I surrender, I believe, Holy Trinity, I love you, orthodoxy. And he did that personally. He would torture these free thinker types who were actually just normal Christian seekers like Tolstoy or me, and he would torture them to an inch of their death, and beyond. He would kill them. He was the most horrendous example of what Putin's doing. Putin is following that school, and he looks on him, by the way, as his hero. So this is why it's quite dangerous. So I've exposed the trouble with evangelism, which is a sort of extreme Protestant sectarianism. And now I'm trying to call out what people mean by orthodoxy. And I'm not saying anything here that I've met authentic Orthodox theologians, Callistos Ware, and I used to go to the Russian Orthodox Cathedral in London for services. I've been to Orthodox Cathedral in where Patriarch St. Bartholomew lives, who's the head of the Orthodox Communion worldwide in Istanbul. I've been to a service there. I love the Orthodox Church. But it's gone wrong a bit intellectually. And, I'd be very happy to help them get a copy of the King Charles III Bible as well. We ought to give it to them, because Putin types should no longer be in control of their, potentially beautiful civilization in Russia and Ukraine, which has many Orthodox believers. But like I've always said, I'm a Protestant and a Catholic. I'm also Orthodox because I believe in going straight to the truth. I'm an Aristotelian, and I don't see these as dialectically opposed terms. Okay, that's what I wanted to say here. And any questions? Yeah.
Yes, you gave me an idea. I'm sure you had this idea, but I have learned that in history, especially in Eastern Europe, we had many conflicts which were enhanced by the competition between Catholic Church and Orthodox Church. Nowadays, every country, even Russia, France, I don't know about the US, I don't know about the UK, but in these countries, more and more people are atheists.
Yeah.
So why cannot we invite our church to send a peace message together? You see, not going through the diplomatic way. That's one way, the diplomatic way. There are many other ways, but one way could be also the church calling for peace in every country. And at that time, as a Catholic, the Pope, with a not a heavy sound voice, said, please make peace, but
he has called for it in Ukraine and Russia, and in Palestine and Israel. He's been calling for it.
And my hope is that they could say that together with the Ukrainian head of church on
the Anglicans.
Yes.
Yeah, King Charles. And I was on a Zoom call a while back with the Bishop of Jerusalem, the Anglican Bishop of Jerusalem in Palestine, who has a cathedral, which I've been to, because, of course, a lot of Palestinians are Anglican Christians, because we ran the place for many decades, and they quite like the Anglicans. The guy in Bethlehem said, we love you, bring us Boy Scouts, we used to love your Boy Scouts again. You know, they remember the British Mandate as a time of fairly civilised values, and the Anglican Church is still active in Palestine, and yet it's being blown up. And Bishop Ria, who's a friend of mine, Anglican Bishop of Jerusalem, I mean, yes, he could join. He has issued countless appeals, you know. But I like that idea, yes. Okay, let me actually, in response to that, let me share another thing that I did this week on the Christian thing. Which is I chaired a Zoom conference on, I think it was Wednesday, with a talk by a man called Professor Bart McKettrick, who's a Scottish Christian, Catholic, a theologian and specialist educator. He's worked at the University of Glasgow in education for many decades. He's an older man, but he's the chair of the University of Bethlehem, which I visited in Bethlehem. It's a Christian university, open to every type of Christian. They still have 800 students a year enrolled. It's fee-paying, so, you know, they're middle-class kids that manage to get in there. And he's in charge of, you know, masterminding the curriculum stuff. We had a very interesting talk he gave, and we then asked questions. I asked him if University of Bethlehem had a peace studies department. And I was a bit shocked when he went into a whole sort of rant about, no, we don't need peace, we need justice. And I've met people like that before. They think peace studies is a threat to their worldview because actually we want justice. And no doubt he's talking to Palestinians that say justice first, peace later. But I pointed out that the two aren't opposed to each other, you know. And I did point out there are like thousands of law departments in universities around the world. Every university in the world has a law department which looks at what justice is and the philosophy of law. But there are very few peace studies departments, maybe a few handfuls. And so far as I know, there's only about a couple in Israel, and then nothing in any peace studies department until you get to India. And I've been campaigning and trying to get Islamic universities to set up peace studies departments. I'd love to be an advisor and get it going. In Tehran, for instance, they have a peace museum because they have such tremendous wisdom in Islam about peace, whether it's Shia or Sunni or Sufi or Ismaili wisdom. And I believe these Muslims should learn what peace is from an Islamic perspective and an interfaith perspective. But I was surprised to hear from a Christian theologian that he hadn't thought of Bethlehem University having a peace studies department. So I did offer to help set one up if he wants to contact me. But he's been out there meeting people who've lost friends in Gaza. He said, look, this is tragic, it's like edugicide. They've killed scholars, they've targeted schools, they've targeted universities. There's no university standing in Gaza. They've bombed libraries and bookshops. You know, it's very cynical what Israel has done with its bombardments. They say they're going after Hamas, but no, they're taking out the intelligentsia. I think the tragedy is that Israel should have been working with the international community on weaning the Palestinian intelligentsia away from violence, away from Hamas, working with them to persuade them peace is the answer. But anyway, I thought you might be interested in that as a supplement to what I was saying.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, let's do our periodic table now. You go first. Tell
Yes,
me.
it's like a synchronicity because you spoke about Christianity, and before coming, I selected the Catholic Church.
Okay, so that's number 43. Right. Well, as since you're a Roman Catholic, can you tell me what it is? It would be impolite of me to go first. How do you see the Roman Catholic Church, and what part did it play in your formation, education, and spiritual upbringing?
Yeah, my parents both believe in God and Christ, and I went to the office every Sunday, and I'm very grateful to add this education, like the milk, listening to the Gospels very often, so it's engraved in my mind. So, but after that, I didn't felt like pursuing sharing office in community. Because I could not find maybe a kind of intellectual or mystical approach of the Gospels, and well, so what could I say to about the Catholics? I just shut my mouth because I quit the boat. And
did you never think of training as a priest? I mean, you spent time in Africa,
yes,
running a Jesuit library, didn't
yes,
you? Working
yes,
with Jesuits?
yes.
Didn't you think of joining the Jesuits?
No, I didn't. Most of priests, they say, they receive like a call, saying, "I need you to."
Like a shaman gets
yes.
a call, and you never got the call.
No. I am an engineer. I have to to deal with the matter, not with the spirit.
I don't think it has to be one or the other, does it?
Thy
Thy kingdom come on earth
yeah.
as it is in heaven. I mean,
Yes.
surely Christ was trying to he needs engineers too.
Yes, yes.
Like,
That's
to keep-
why my way is that this one, I guess.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So I found, I mean, I wasn't taught Catholicism as a child. I was taught sort of Anglicanism, and then I explored alone, studied. I was told to read Augustine by someone at school when I was about 15, but I rejected the idea. I thought I already instinctively didn't agree with Augustine because his ideas of original sin and eternal damnation, it seemed a bit trivial. So I didn't bother to read him. But since then I have studied some of the greats. I've studied Ambrose to some extent, St. Benedict, who I like, and I've been to Monte Cassino where he founded the Benedictine order. I studied Boethius, who's a philosopher and who was a Catholic philosopher who fed Plato and Aristotle into the Catholic intellectuals of Europe at the time. I have studied Duns Scotus, who I particularly like, who was a Franciscan, who wrote about will and the will to truth. And he's a very sophisticated thinker. I recommend reading Duns Scotus if you've got time. He was always regarded as one of the most intelligent of all the Christians, and I think he's one of the deepest. And he's inspired Heidegger, for instance, many years later. And even Luther had studied Duns Scotus. I've also studied Thomas Aquinas, who I love, and I'm listening to the Summa Theologica in my spare time. I've got about 40 hours left. He's brilliant, but I've told the story before, I think, of how towards the end of his life he had that levitational experience and he realised you just can't put it into words. And then he left Naples and he was riding on a horse towards Lyon, where the Pope had called the council, General Ecumenical Council in Lyon. And he must have been daydreaming, thinking about something, because his horse wandered into the nearby wood and he bashed his head on a low branch, going at full gallop. And he came off his horse, and sadly that was the end of Aquinas. He then was taken to the nearby monastery and died, and he was very young, only in his 30s. So we lost a great thinker. I believe that if he'd have lived long enough, and if he had access to all the stuff we've got now, like the Gnostic Gospels and all that, he would be saying what I'm saying. You know, it's logical, my position. And he would stop his ranting against Cathars and heretics. He would realise that heresy, orthodoxy, Catholicism, Protestantism, it's like a circle, a three-dimensional sphere. Christ is in the middle, and there are many, all those have elements of Christ in them. But if Christ is the Son of God, then he is the universal. If we accept that intellectually, what that means, the Son of God, it means he is someone who incarnated the nous, the cosmic intelligence. That makes him a super-intellectual, right? And that's what Aquinas realised, I think. But he would then realise that that he's at the root of all the boxes that are in blue, trace back to discussions that were going on around the table, the supper tables in Galilee when Christ was teaching and having his after party. I've also studied St. Francis, and at one point I very nearly became a Franciscan monk. I decided I want to surrender to study, spend a life of prayer and research, and the Franciscans would be the best. And I used to go to the Franciscan monastery in London, near Paddington, and very nearly joined. But then unfortunately that same time in my life I met a certain woman who I fell in love with, and we had a marriage and 2 children. So that was the end of my monkhood. But it's not too late. I've also looked at St. Dominic, and a great man, but not a sophisticated enough intellectual for me, I'm afraid. He was too much into bashing heretics. And the Dominicans became the shock troops of the Catholic Inquisition, burning the fires for witches and pagans and Cathars and all that. justifying it on very intellectual reasons, which I just don't agree with. I'm reading The Name of the Rose, if you haven't read it, Umberto Eco, because they figure in that. You know, Ignatius Loyola as well, I've also studied, and I've known people that have been Jesuits. I've had friends who were Jesuits, and I have a lot of respect for him. But also I have some unanswered questions, because one of my closest friends lives in the Jesuit college in University of Oxford. And through him I communicated with the provost or the dean there, because I discovered something interesting about Ignatius. When he had his conversion experience in Spain, and he stopped being a knight, like he was just a knight about town, you know, into brawling and duels and all that. And then he fought in a couple of serious wars and got wounded. And during the wound recovery, he found God, read books about saints and decided he wanted to be a saint. And he brought to it all the kind of rigour of military thinking. So the Jesuit order was set up essentially along military lines to conquer the world for Christ. Okay, but what I discovered, which is very interesting, is that the first plan was to start in the Middle East. Loyola wanted to start by converting the Muslims to Christianity. And the Jesuits were intended as a shock troop of intellectuals that were going to go to the Middle East and convert all the Muslims. He went to the Holy Land, spent 6 months there. But he realised how difficult it was. Like, people have been trying this for centuries, and they had a very sophisticated theology of their own, and they had their Quran. The Franciscans in the Middle East said, Loyola, it's not worth it. You know, we've been trying this for decades. It's not going to happen. We've tried it for centuries. Go off and do something else somewhere else. And he did. And that's when the great Jesuit mission started to Latin America, Canada and China. And the Portuguese took them, and the Spanish. But I have a question about this, which I've tried to get answered. Nobody's answered. I wrote to the people in Oxford, they didn't answer. And I even suggested we have a conference on it, which is, when were the first Qurans in use in the Jesuit order? Loyola lived in Rome for the last decades of his life, and he had like a study centre there. He had a library, presumably. What version of the Quran in translation were they using? When did Loyola, did he ever actually read the Quran? And did he ever assign 10 of his top intellectuals to study the Quran and do a commentary on it? Or did he just regard it as the work of the Antichrist and just, no, let's kill them all, defeat them all? I wonder, and I just want to know, because it has importance for interfaith work now. And I can't find out. So if anyone knows the first ever Jesuit translation of the Quran, I'd love to know who did it and when.
Did you ask to the Vatican?
Not yet, no. I haven't asked the official Jesuit, sort of higher up than the Oxford lot. They're the head in Britain. So, I mean, I will pursue it. I can ask ChatGPT, of course, they'll probably know. But I was in the Vatican Library, and I didn't look at that time. But to me, it's an interesting question. Because, of course, I did myself a big commentary on the Quran. And it's just being written up and typed up. And it will be published, next year. 3,000 pages. And I've got to add a few footnotes. And one of them will be about the Jesuit. Have they done a commentary on the Quran before? And if not, I humbly submit my commentary might help them to understand the actual faith. I've also studied Raymond Lull, the great Majorcan Catholic, from a mystic, and Meister Eckhart as well, and Erasmus, who was a scholar like me and a deep Catholic who wanted to combine humanism with the Catholic faith. It was quite possible to do this. You didn't have to become a Lutheran to enjoy studying Christian texts in Greek and stuff. Erasmus showed that humanism is totally in harmony with Catholic teachings. And there was a beautiful moment in the late 1400s, early 1500s, when some of the greatest Catholic thinkers were doing this, like Cardinal Egidio de Viterbo, another guy that I really recommend people to study, who was a fan of the Kabbalah. He learned Hebrew, he translated the Zohar. He said, you can't understand Christ unless you know the Zohar and the Kabbalistic texts, because that's where he was coming from. I agree 100%. Although I think Christ had his own route to the same source that the Zohar took it from. I think Christ was an autonomous, proto-Kabbalist of a Christian variety. And so there was this Christian Kabbalistic tradition going on in Rome and Italy. Pico della Mirandola, another great thinker, was part of that movement. More recently, Bernard Lonergan, great Canadian theologian, would understand everything I'm saying. He's a great thinker. So in France, Lanzo del Vasto, who was a Gandhian Catholic, went to India, founded communities. Teilhard de Chardin. These are the people I respect, and in a sense that's why I'm also a Catholic, because I think these are wise people. E.F. Schumacher is another. Dom Bede Griffiths. And Dom Sylvester Huydard, who was a monk at Grenache Abbey. He was a friend of mine in Gloucestershire. So, to me, my reading of the Catholic Church means the universal whole church. The church which embraces all possible truths and goes back, I believe, to the teachings of Christ, who I think, as I say, was an enlightened cosmic intellectual who knew all this stuff. Okay. Any questions?
There is a quote in the Gospel saying that showing the children and saying, I reveal the truth to the children, not to the scholars. And I think this is one point. Of course, intellectual studies are fundamental, but as well a new way of experimenting love from the young age in the community, in school, with people you don't know or whatever. And a new catechism is necessary, in my view. Maybe written by scholars.
Yeah, but it puts it into normal language they can understand.
Yes.
I agree. I mean, I'm not against the church's mission to the young and the schools. I mean, that's why I've taught in these kind of schools.
Yeah.
But I think there are different levels of teaching. And I also think that in every class, of 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds, you'll get 2 or 3 that have got a really brilliant mind and will question the received dogmas. They'll say, why do I have to eat the body and blood of Christ? How is that possible? I don't understand that. That's ridiculous. I want to be a footballer or something, So you have to be able to explain at a higher level. I'm interested in teaching gifted and what's called gifted and talented children. And they want the real McCoy. And Christ himself was the same. He taught, as we know from the Gospels, he taught from the masses at a certain level, but then he saved his innermost teachings, his more esoteric teachings, for his innermost disciples. And they were called mathematici, which is mathematical students.
Ah.
That's the Greek word for disciples.
I didn't know.
Discipulus is Latin. They were the mathematici, and I believe he was a profoundly intelligent teacher who could cope with all different kinds, of subtle thinkers and fisherman types. And I mean, he had friends among the rabbis on the Sanhedrin. I mean, he was prepared to teach women, like Mary Magdalene and others. So, yes, I agree. I mean, I think the cosmic mind can can be transferred and transmitted in a way that children understand it. So I always like teaching young children, actually. When I was head of religious studies in schools in Britain, they're from 11 to 18. The 11-year-olds are great to work with because they're so, like, naive,
Yes.
but they have a big heart. And you can, I mean, everything I've said now, I could have explained it, you know, in 10 minutes to them, just summarising it, which I did. Yes. And the only person that ever walked out of one of my lessons was a clever sixth former who defined himself as an evangelical. Interesting. And he really hated what I was teaching about Nietzsche and Sartre. He was studying philosophy. He said, I'm not listening to this, it's all horrible, I'm a Christian. And he walked out. You know, he wasn't able to hear the universal perspective. I believe that once you put up walls and barriers, we have problems, you know. We have to be sappers or hermeticians, communicating the absolute between all the boxes. We have to go underground, smuggling the good news to them all. That the real good news is we're all on the same team, actually, and we don't have to fight.
Oh, I have another remark.
Go for
Very short one.
Yeah.
One of my mother, very good friend, was a Dominican. And she said, we are very democratic. All decisions, we vote too much. So maybe the new Dominican, you may like it because it's not hierarchical, like in yes, it's very democratic. All people are elected by vote.
Of course, nowadays, I mean, candidates can put lies forward and stand on lies, like we've seen in the American elections. Democracy itself is no good unless it's accompanied by education and intelligence and wisdom, you know. But anyway, with that little caveat, and also I should just say on that score that Simon de Montfort, who was the founder of the British Parliament, who opposed the king, his father had gone and beaten up all the Cathars. He led the Cathar Crusade and supported the Dominicans. He was a really fierce warrior. He killed Cathars. And then he went back to London. His son created Parliament. And it's, I mean, I love Parliament, don't get me wrong. I'm an active member of the Lib Dems. I'm on the Committee for France. But I also like the House of Lords, which has more access to the divine intelligence. And I'd like to see other faiths in the House of Lords than just Anglicans. I think this thing with Welby, I think we've got to let Muslims, Jews, Druids, Hindus, they should have at least one each. And the Anglicans should have about 3, you know. Because this is ridiculous. And that's spiritual democracy, if you want. Okay, let's do our tarot of the day. To finish, this is very important. The gods coming upon us. Right, you do your first one. Yeah. Okay. Right, there we are. Ooh, Perun, yes. Right. Okay. Well, it's funny because Perun is the Slavic and Russian god of, he's the top god basically in the ancient world, and he was a god of warfare and sacrifice. And you don't mess around with Perun. In the pagan days of Russian culture, before the Christians, he demanded human sacrifices. Not that many, but just like